And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reedsy Live. My name is Martin. I'm from the team here at Reedsy. We're a marketplace that connects writers and authors with some of the best publishing talent in the world. That's editors, that's translators, that's book cover designers, marketers, whatever you like, whoever you need to help you go out there and put out better books. You can find them here. But strangely enough, today we are not really talking about books. We are turning our hand to the world of screen fiction. That's movies and TV, and I've got my guest today, Richard Stokes, who's a screenwriter and TV producer. He'll be here talking to us, talking about the art of adapting one's book for the screen. So while we are waiting, please let me know where you're coming from today. There's a little comments box here on the side, so do pop that in. I'd love to see where we're all coming from. And we have Cal from up north from where? Teddy House, standing by in northern Michigan, and Five Pfeffer in Los Angeles, where movies live. We have John from Tucson, Arizona, 94-degree day. A new record. Oh. No, that means nothing to me, but I guess the closer we get to 100, it's probably quite patchy. Langdon. There we have Blaylock from Dallas, Texas. And we have Michelle. Michelle says it should have already started. It has now. But yes, we're in that sort of weird time where I send out a notification to everyone telling them to turn up at a certain time, and the clocks have gone forward in North America and maybe South America, I believe, but not in Europe and not in some other places. So the times get a little bit strange. As you may have noticed, or maybe not, I'm a bit under the weather. I was at a publishing conference last week where I think I may have picked up something, but don't worry. Thanks to the fact that this is a purely digital format, you're all protected from my illness through the barriers of technology. So, I'm still very happy to be here. Monique from the Netherlands, Simeon from Malawi, Efren from Los Angeles. Efren, we met at a conference last year. Good to see you here. Michael from Boston, Massachusetts, Mary Kay from Pittsburgh. Really good to see everyone here. And yeah, as a bit of housekeeping, if you can give this video a thumbs up, a preemptive thumbs up, and perhaps even subscribe to the channel, you'll be the first ones. Oh, and a preemptive thumbs down. None of that, please. Anyway, if you subscribe to the channel, you'll get to see the first. You'll be the first to find out whenever we have new ones of these launched, and also I try to put out videos once a week, and you can be entreated to those when we premiere them. Anyway, it is now 7 o'clock where I am here in Scotland, which means it's 3 p.m. on the East Coast, midday on the West Coast. I think it's like half midnight in Mumbai, 3 or 4 in Hong Kong, maybe 5 to 5-ish. I'm usually quite good at this, but daylight savings. Let's get this thing started. Everyone, welcome to Reedsy Live. Welcome everyone to Reedsy Live, the ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books and screenplays. For indeed, today we are having a very special guest with us, Richard, who is one of the editors here on Reedsy. His background is partially in the world of television. He is a screenwriter and also a TV executive, and he'll be talking to us about adapting your book, whether that is a book that is out there in the world or one that you are prospectively writing, into a screenplay. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm really pleased to see so many folks with us. Looking like we have almost 400 people and 73 thumbs up. Thank you, everyone, for giving us these precious thumbs. Is what we live for. But I do know that my guest has plenty of stuff to share today, so I shan't dither any longer. But it leaves me only to introduce you to Richard Stokes. Richard, how are you?
Hi there. Thanks, Martin. I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I am good. You, I believe, are down in London, the heart of the British entertainment scene.
I am indeed. Yes, northwest London. I can't quite see the heart of the industry from here, but it's quite close.
Cool. Well, I know you've sent over a little slide deck that I shall be operating from behind the scenes. If you
Thank you.
do need anything during this, do let me know. Everyone at home, you'll be able to put down little questions in the comments and reactions box. I will be a little bit distracted throughout this, but there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for Rich, just keep them in mind, and we'll get to them at the end. All right, here is your presentation. Let me know if you need anything.
Great stuff. Thank you. Thanks very much, Martin. Hello, everybody. So we're going to be talking about adapting a book, your book probably, into a screenplay. And adapting from a literary medium into a visual medium. So first one is going to talk a little bit about me, just so you know who I am. My name is Richard Stokes. I was a TV producer for 25 years. I produced shows such as Broadchurch, Silk, Torchwood, Law and Order UK. I then joined BBC Studios as an exec producer and made Sign of Witness, Inspector Lindley. So a lot of crime stories. And most recently, I did The Watch for AMC, which is a sci-fi comedy. But I'm also a writer. I wrote several episodes for Law and Order UK, and I've also written spec scripts, some of which have been optioned by production companies. Some I've entered into script competitions, and that got me through to finals of various script competitions, which got me representation with a manager in the United States. And that's relevant for something I'll be talking about later. Currently, right now, I'm actually writing an adaptation of a spec TV script I wrote a few years ago into a novel. So I'm kind of adapting the other way around, which is a really interesting perspective on the entire thing, which maybe we can go into in a bit more detail a little later on. So moving swiftly on. So we'll be discussing adapting a manuscript into a screenplay in sort of roughly three parts. The first one of which is, what is an adaptation? Asking the question, what is it? What tensions exist between a literary medium and a visual medium? How do we try and overcome them? Part two will be sort of more sort of practical steps about how you can move from a manuscript into a screenplay, particularly with your own work, the starting process of how you do that, and asking the key question, can you become distant enough, objective enough from your own material to be able to make the hard choices that an adaptation needs? And then at the very end, I'll do a sort of part three little section, which is what to do with your screenplay once you have written it. Where can it go? What can you do with it? How can you try and build momentum behind the piece that you've written? So first question, why can't you just reformat? Why can't you just take your novel and just put it through Final Draft or screenwriter software and put it out as a screenplay? Well, purely from a maths point of view, we know that a novel is anywhere between 70, 80 to 200,000 words. And a screenplay, a movie screenplay, and I will be looking at movie screenplays specifically for this as reference, is about 22 to 24,000 words. Now, just the maths means you know that you therefore have to cut an awful lot of material. But it's not a maths exercise, it's a creative one, but it's illustrative of what adaptation fundamentally is. It's about choice. It's about what stays and what goes. But this is the key. It's about distilling the ingredients of your manuscript into a screenplay, into a different format, so that it captures the essence, the spirit, the theme, whatever you want to call it, of the book, and turns it into a new visual form. And yet at the same time, it tells the same story. It should have the same emotional impact at the end of the screenplay, at the end of the film, as it does at the end of a book. So how do you do this? First thing you do, you create the spine. Now, the first thing that means is going through your manuscript and working out, is there enough plot? Is there enough, very simplistically, is there enough stuff that happens that you can actually translate into a visual medium that people can watch in a movie theater? Is there physical action? Is there dialogue? Are there subtextual dramas happening? Are there subplots? Think about in the manuscript how much of the story is narrated or how much of it is internalized, because a really extraordinary 20-page inner monologue about the demons that someone is trying to face on their own is not going to make great cinema. You can dramatize it in a different way, but that internal monologue of 20 pages is going to have to come through in a different form. So look for those kind of things. Look for the things that you can see. the locations, the emotions on an actor's face, the imagery, the production design, costumes. Is it day? Is it night? What's the weather doing outside? Things that you can hear, dialogue obviously being the main one, and sound effects, and possibly also some incidental music, or the music that's within the story. And those are the things that you're going to be able to sort of take from your manuscript and put it into this spine, which I will call a beat sheet. There's various different descriptions of it, but essentially what you're trying to do is create a chronological order of events which happen in the book from a beginning through a middle to an end. And those are the things that can be dramatized visually from your manuscript. Think of it as the vertebrae of the spine, each of these individual events that happen. You are literally joining the dots of the narrative. And so once you have this beat sheet, and it could be notes in the margin of your manuscript, it could be circle paragraphs, it could be you write it all out, whatever it is, whatever works for you. But once you have this beat sheet, you then need to ask yourself the key question, which is, what is your story about? What is the overarching theme that binds these story elements together? Think of it as a sort of story glue. When I was first asked to do this, I reached out to a friend of mine who I was very lucky to be able to work with on a project a few years ago called David McGee, who's one of the leading screenwrite adaptation screenwriters in the world today. He was Oscar nominated for his screenplay for Life of Pi. He did Finding Neverland, based on the play. He did Ladies Chastity's Lover for Netflix. He's a really, really wonderful writer with huge experience, and is also a very, very lovely guy. And when I spoke to him about this, he sent me a few notes about how he tries to capture the theme of something. And I'm literally going to read out just a couple of paragraphs of something he sent me about Finding Neverland, because it's illustrative of the next key point. So, in the script of Finding Neverland, I saw that the subtitle of the play Peter Pan by James Barrie was The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up. I knew that in many ways James Barrie himself was the one who didn't want to grow up. And at the time I was writing the script, I was facing some personal issues, which meant I knew I was about to do some growing up myself. So I decided that the main theme of the story I was going to write was centered around the question, what does it mean to grow up? All my decisions about character, and all my choices about which subplots to include and which ones to cut were centered around exploring that one idea, what does it mean to grow up? It wasn't a message I was trying to send to the audience. In fact, I doubt most people watching the film had any idea that I used that question to shape the story, but I do believe that they could feel something, tying all the different elements and threads together that they wouldn't have felt if I hadn't relied on that theme as I wrote the script. Now, sorry, it's quite a long sort of little side bit, but it's really important that you get the theme of what your story is, because once you have it, it informs every other decision you make. And once you have your word, your phrase, whatever it is that you have in terms of your theme, write it on a Post-it and stick it on your screen, next to your keyboard, wherever it is, somewhere in peripheral vision that you can see it and refer to it with every choice that you then make, because it will inform all your next decisions. Just to quickly give you some examples of themes, of sort of literally just a handful of adaptations that I like or I know. Finding Neverland, we've talked about what it means to grow up. Room with a View, wonderful film based on the Forster book, is a search for identity. Deliverance, very much like Jurassic Park or Jaws, is about man versus nature. Field of Dreams, based on the book Shoeless Joe, is about reconciliation with the father. Girl on the Train, perceptions of reality because of her alcohol problem and her blackouts. What's real? What's she imagined? What bits is she filling in her life? And Life of Pi, which David did, is about the power of narrative. It's about stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the chaos that is around us. And that's the story as Pi looks back on his time after the shipwreck in the middle of the sea. And there are many other, I've listed a few there, but there are many other themes that it could be. It could be anything, but try and make it have an emotional root or an emotional core, because if it resonates emotionally with you, it will most likely resonate emotionally with a wider audience. If you try and do, if your theme is something like space exploration or wonders of technology, it kind of needs to have an emotional heart to it somewhere. Otherwise, it's not going to resonate out to a wider audience. So moving on to sort of part two, or sort of continuing your book into your screenplay, what practical steps can you take? So you have your narrative spine. You hopefully have your theme on a post-it. Nora Ephron, who, amazing writer as she was, she used to teach students, and she told this story where she said, when you first start adapting a book, you put the book right next to your keyboard and you start working and you start typing away. And then slowly, as you move through the drafting process, you shift the book further and further away from your keyboard until it drops off the edge of the desk. And essentially what she was trying to tell her students, what she was saying was, it needs to become its own thing. The screenplay needs to have its own identity. I was trying to find a similar analogy. And for the parents who are watching or viewing, it's like having a child. There is a shared DNA there between the parent and the child. But ultimately, one of the parents' responsibilities is to pass on enough knowledge and teach the child so that they can become their own person. They can have their own independence and gain their own identity. And that's very much like moving a book into a screenplay. It needs to become its own thing. And the big question is, can you be objective enough if you're doing your own work to be able to make the tough decisions? So you need to be able to make those hard decisions, to be able to cut material and decide what to keep. How do we do that? So the first thing you need to do is, just let that sort of catch it, is choose your hero or your heroine. Now, the lead character will be the character with the biggest character arc, which means that they will go through the most significant character change across your story. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a polar opposite, but sometimes it is. It might be the character starts happy and ends up depressed, or starts depressed and ends up happy, whatever it might be. But what's key is that they will be active. They will be making decisions or choosing things to do that drive the story forward. It's really important because movie stories generally, but certainly movie stories, are not passive. They don't happen to the lead character. The lead character makes the story happen by deciding to do something, sometimes willingly, sometimes reluctantly, but ultimately they are forced into positions where they have to make decisions or do things that drive the story forward. I'll give you an example. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In the book is narrated from the point of view of Chief Bradman, the Indigenous American who is within the institution. And he observes, the book is basically his observation of this character who is admitted, who tries to disrupt everything, tries to bring the institution down, tries to rage against it, gets into all sorts of battles with Nurse Ratched and the rest of the staff. And that character, of course, is the McMurphy character played by Jack Nicholson in the film. So when the screenplay was written, they said, well, we can't make Bradman the lead character because he's passive. He doesn't do anything. He just sits back and watches McMurphy make a sort of madness of everything. So McMurphy is the lead in the film because he is the one who makes the decisions and does things that drives the story forward. And your hero and heroine will be all the better. And we will cheer for them and root for them if they are faced with obstacles, problems, and roadblocks. So work out who is your antagonist. What are the problems that your hero or heroine are going to face? So, for example, in Peter Venture's Jaws, Brody, it's the great white shark. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it's McMurphy versus Nurse Ratched and the institution that she represents. In Lord of the Rings, it's Frodo, the weight and power of the ring that is Sauron. Whatever it is, your hero must overcome a seemingly insurmountable obstacle in order to reach their goal, whether it's to bring down an institution or drop a ring into a flame or kill the great white shark, whatever it might be. And raise the stakes, keep your stakes as high as they can. This is a kind of silly example, but when Brody goes out into the ocean to destroy the monster, it's a great white shark. It's, the most feared predator in the seas. It's not a plague of jellyfish. Now, a plague of jellyfish would still close the beach and could still kill people, but it's not a great white shark. So choose your antagonist. How many other characters are you going to have? In a book, you can have a lot of characters who might come in for one little moment They might have a funny line. They might illustrate a character. They might represent a backstory. There might just be a reference of a sibling or a family that the hero or heroine has. You won't have space for that many characters in your screenplay. You've got to get it down to 90 to 120 minutes. And that means that you might have to do various things with your characters. You may have to cut them. Most obvious example is the Harry Potter franchise, where a lot of the characters who were in the books, they might have been referenced in the movies, or you might have seen them in a picture, but they didn't necessarily have lines or appear as their own characters because they just didn't have the space. You may have to combine some characters. Phil Alden Robinson, who did the screenplay for Field of Dreams, based on the book Shoeless Joe, in the book, so the story basically is about someone who hears these weird voices, who is convinced to build a baseball field in his farm. And in the book, one of the threats, one of the obstacles that the hero faces is that there are several people trying to buy the farm. He's not making much money. He needs money. There's various buyers circling around. Phil Alden Robinson, when these 3 or 4 characters are all basically doing the same thing. So in the film, the person who is trying to buy the farm, the antagonist to Kevin Costner's character, is the brother-in-law. He combined all those characters into one. You may have to create characters, or you may have to exaggerate a character that only exists briefly. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it might help dramatize certain elements in a much more efficient way within a screenplay. So in Life of Pi, the character played by Rafe Spall, who is the journalist reporter who Pi tells his story to, is actually quite an important framing device within the film. He does appear in the book, but in tiny, tiny little moments. In fact, I had to go back to the book to remind myself that he's actually there. It's a much bigger character in the film. So what else can you do in terms of trying to sort of trim down and build this spine without distractions? And there are things called cul-de-sacs. I think it's actually a Phil Alden Robinson phrase. Actually, he talks about story cul-de-sacs. And these are story elements which may explore a character, it may explore backstory, it may provide narrative context. But ultimately what you're doing is you're deviating from the main road, the main path of the story, going down a cul-de-sac, maybe telling a great little story on its own. But ultimately, when you come back to the main road, you're exactly where you left, which means you haven't moved the story forward. Perfect example of this is Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings. There's a whole chapter about Tom in the book. He opens the Hobbit's eyes to a kind of magical realism. He sort of gives them a foretaste of the adventure that they might be embarking on. But ultimately, when they leave Tom, they kind of continue on their journey and they haven't moved forward. They haven't moved on with the story. And so it was a very easy cut for Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh to cut that character from the finished screenplay. Another example in Peter Bench's Jaws, Brody's wife Ellen has an affair with Hooper, the shark expert. They knew each other back at college. He comes back. She doesn't like living on the coast. A relationship develops. They cut that entirely, that subplot, from the film. They just didn't have time to be able to develop the emotional depth required to do that story justice. So it was cut. So a quick note about cause and effect. I've talked about narrative momentum and moving the story forward a few times. It's really important in a screenplay. Cause and effect is actually much more important in a screenplay than it is in a book. If you are not setting something up, then you should be paying something off. Martin, I'm just going to give you a little nudge there we go. So every word is important in the screenplay. Everything should be there to either set up a character, set up a tone, set up a style, a location, an event that you might call back later on, or it might pay off later on. That sense of cause and effect gives an internal momentum to the narrative in a screen. And the reason that's really important is because in a movie theater, you buy a ticket and you sit in a darkened room and sit for 2 hours where someone else tells a story to you. You have to trust that story, trust that storyteller, that they're going to tell you an interesting story. And it's very easy to become disengaged. It's very easy to lose focus and lose track of what's going on. So you need this constant momentum of moving forward with the story, which you don't necessarily have to have in a book. You can pick up a book, read a bit, get engaged with it, put it down, come back to it a few days later, reread it. it's an active thing, picking up a book and reading it. Watching a movie is a passive thing where someone has to tell a story to you visually. So you have to keep that narrative moving, and that keeps an audience engaged. So yes, so nothing is wasted in terms of a screenplay. So that was a quick race through, quick summary of parts 1 and 2. So go through your manuscript, create your beat sheet, create that spine that gives you the narrative elements of the vertebrae that create the spine. Once you've got that, work out what your theme is, stick it to your screen or your keyboard, work out who your hero or heroine is, work out who their antagonist, what their obstacles are. Remember that hero or heroine must be active. They must be moving the story forward. They're the ones making the decisions that drives the story forward. Who are your supporting players? You might have to cut some, you may have to combine some, you may have to create or exaggerate some. Story cul-de-sacs. Find out which ones they are, which subplots work, which ones are slightly getting in the way, which ones are killing the pace. Lose those. And cause and effect. If it's not setting up or paying off, what's it doing in your script? Ask yourself that question. Is the scene, is the moment, is the dialogue justifying itself? Write what you can see or hear and write it in the present tense. A very obvious thing to say, but I have seen this error where novels are written generally in the past tense. It's a recounted story, and screenplays are written in the present tense. It's happening now as you watch the movie. So you need to impart that within your screenplay. So everything's in the present tense. It's a general rule of thumb, and there are, of course, exceptions, but generally, if you can't film it with a camera or record it with a sound device, it shouldn't be in your screenplay. There's no point in writing huge, long stage directions about a subtext of something that's going on in a character's head if that actor can't actually act it. So, part 3, the reality check. This is just a quick whiz through of what you do once you have your screenplay. You won't sell your screenplay to a production company or a studio on your own. It's just, you won't. You need representation for all sorts of various legal reasons. If you want to raise money in an independent sector, best of luck to you. It is a route to go, but it's really, really hard. But if you're trying to sell your screenplay to a production company or a studio, you need to get an agent or a manager. The systems are slightly different in the UK or the US. In the UK, an agent does kind of everything. In the US, you want a manager first who will nurture your talent, build a portfolio, work with you on your scripts until they're ready to sell, and then they'll bring in or contact or recommend an agent. And that's how it kind of works. So how do you get representation with your script? Well, cold call, send an email. Think about who your favorite writers are in terms of screenwriters and adaptive screenwriters, and then find out who their agent is. You can find out on the internet. There is a place called IMDb Pro, which requires a subscription. But generally, you can find out on the internet who your favorite writers' agents are. Go to that agent's website. And usually on that website, there will be at the bottom of the page something that says contact us. And there will be a specific person or email address that you can contact if you want your script read by somebody, and you send a polite letter saying, please read my script. I'm looking for representation. This is roughly what the script is about. I love your agency. I know this writer. I think they're great. And send it off. Chase, but don't stalk. It's a key difference. And you're perfectly within your rights to send a follow-up email, but actually these people will have huge numbers of scripts to read. So please hang on for maybe 4 to 6 weeks first time around, and then you can send a little polite, just checking that you got my script, and please can you let me know. And if you are polite, you'll probably get a response saying, so I haven't read it, we'll read it next, it's on our next to-do list. And you may have to wait again for another 4 to 6 weeks, at which point you send another polite little, just checking that you got my email. So you can chase, you can nudge, but give them time to be able to read it. You can enter your script into script competitions. I would recommend Coverfly, which is a kind of umbrella organization that looks after a lot of script competitions on the internet. Each one usually requires a little bit of money to send your script into. But I am an example of someone who got representation through that. I sent a spec script I wrote to various competitions. It got through to a final of a couple of them, won a sci-fi competition. And as a result of that, I got representation in the US. So that can happen. You can put a script up on what I call sort of script shop windows. The Blacklist is probably the most famous, which again is sort of US site, but you can send scripts in from anywhere. You pay a little bit of money to put your script up there, and you pay a little bit of money to get reviews, and the reviews give you a score out of 10, and depending upon what your score is, you can go up and down the recommendation list. And that is approached by producers. It is looked at by Hollywood. There's a Kevin Costner film called Draft Day, which was made because it was a good script that was very high up on the Blacklist one year, several years ago, and a producer saw it and went, that would make a great movie, and it got made. So it did happen. Your script may not get made. In fact, just purely on the amount of people who are out there trying to do it, it probably won't. But no writing is wasted. Think of your screenplay as a calling card, because it could be a script that gets a meeting that leads you to the gig that ultimately gets to a project that does get made. It can be that long and arduous a process, but if your screenplay is good writing, it will get noticed. It will pay for itself at some point, even if it itself doesn't get made. It's a little bit of a sort of downer. So to end, I thought I'd give you the next slide, which is to say it can be done. And I leave you with a picture of Mario Puzo holding his Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay from his own book, The Godfather, which I think was 1972. But there we go. So look, that's a quick race through the sort of principles, I guess, of sort of looking through your book, your manuscript, and trying to turn it into a screenplay that you might be able to do something with. And I'm very happy to take questions.
Amazing, fantastic. All right, folks, if you have any questions for Richard, do plop them in the chat here. Well, let's start off with a bit of a simple one. John asks, is there a screenplay equivalent of the role of an editor of a novel? Richard?
Yes, absolutely. And they're called script editors. A very short plug for myself. I am a freelance editor on Reedsy, and one of the things that I absolutely specialize in is editing screenplays. So yes, they do exist. They particularly exist in television in the UK. Script editors whose job it is to offer advice, constructive criticism, suggested changes, thoughts, whatever, so that a writer can sort of more quickly do a next draft of their work.
We have also a question here. So generally we do offer, as a service, there are a handful of editors on Reedsy who will do plays and screenplays. So just go into the marketplace and search for those. Richard is just one of a few who does that. But yeah, if you're looking for someone to help shape your screenplay, maybe sort of show you the ropes, I think it's a very good way in. The Clutch asks, if you publish a book that could be great on the big screen, will someone just notice and approach you? Or do you typically have to develop the screenplay first, ongoing a marketing campaign? Like, where does that sort of published book to sort of produced movie pipeline start?
It's more common for if a book does well, if a book gets published and it sells well, it's more common that a production company will discover that novel and option the rights off the writer, and then get a screenwriter to do the adaptation. So it's less well known, it's less common for their own writer, which is why I had to go back to 1972 to find that photo of Mario Puzo. It's less common for a writer to adapt their own work, but it's not unheard of. Deliverance, the film with Bo, I mean, again, it's a 1970s film, but Deliverance the book was written by the same, I can't remember his name, but the guy who wrote the screenplay. Gillian, and again, forgive me, the name's gone, but that's the one, Gone Girl. She wrote the screenplay of her own book. So depending upon how well the book is doing and what momentum you have as a writer, you and your agent may well be able to leverage a deal with a production company to say, well, hey, hang on a second, before you go to a screenwriter, what about my client? What about the person who actually wrote the book in the first place? So that can happen. And most production companies will have readers who will read manuscripts that are coming up to publication but haven't yet been published, but they've started to get a little bit of heat. Either they're sort of selling well to high street stores, because high street stores will make choices on what books they buy before they actually sort of get covers on them and get put out on the market, and they will have teams of readers who will look at those books and those manuscripts before they're published. So quite often the really hottest titles have already been optioned by production companies before they hit the shelves. But if you're the writer of that book, then that's great. That just means you're getting momentum. So that's a sort of quick sort of short version of what the pipeline is usually like. But if you are the writer of the book, then I would, unless you've got a burning desire to do so, I would hang on writing the screenplay until you know that the book is doing well, unless you want to use that story as its own screenplay, in which case go ahead and write it. Do what you want with it. As I say, it can be a calling card for other things.
Jody asks, are the tips you provided applicable to a series?
Yes, they are. In fact, funny enough, I thought about doing a little page on TV, and I just thought I was going to go on too long and assume that this question may come up. Yes, is the short answer. The tips are basically the same. The key difference, the reason I used movies as the sort of comparison, is because they have an act 5, they have an end, they finish, which books tend to do. Books, unless they're a part of a franchise, books will tend to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And the thing about a lot of TV series now, unless it's a limited series based on a book, is that actually they're constantly building in cliffhangers towards the end of the series, and so they actually never conclude. So looking at things like how many characters you have, actually you're still asking people to absorb a story passively, watching it from a screen. So it's still quite hard to have a lot of named characters in a TV series. It is slightly easier, but generally all the principles about moving the story forward, the hero has to be active, heroine has to be active, making the decisions, all those things are exactly the same.
We have good practical question from Dan Rice. Should we worry at all about the potential cost of productions, multiple different locations, lots of CGI? I suppose if we put one explosion on every page, some producers might think twice.
So I know two very good writers who would give completely different answers to this question. One of whom would say you should never censor yourself. You should write the story you want to write, and if the story is set in space with warring starships and there's lots of CG and loads of production design and new costumes to be made and all that kind of stuff, if that's your story, then do it. However, the converse way of looking at that is that money is tight. The industry is not flush with cash right now. And I would say writing with a producer's head is not necessarily a bad thing. So what I would do is I would write a first draft where you write exactly what you want to do. And it should be your story, exactly how you want to tell it. But as you go through the next draft, just have a think to yourself, do you really need that space battle, Roman cavalry coming over the hill, whatever it might be? And if you do, leave it in. And if you think, actually, no, maybe there's a better way of doing it, then leave it out. The reason I say that is because if the script gets picked up by somebody, a production company should be smart enough to be able to read a good story and be able to work with you in how to make it achievable for the budget. So they might say, look, that massive explosion that's outside, can we hear it from indoors rather than actually see it? That might be a producer's suggestion that actually you either, go with or you hate, whatever. But that's the point. You should work with a production company. Remember, a screenplay is not a finished article. It's a blueprint to make something else. So there should be collaboration after you finish the screenplay with a production team and creative people who will help you make those choices. So I would lean towards the write what you want. But if it's going to cost $300 million, then, just be careful who you're trying to sell it to.
We have Helen Saunders, who screams, what about trusting AI to help generate your formatted script? Is this something you've heard of plugging in a manuscript and then saying, generate Oscar-winning screenplay?
Yeah. I mean, slightly worryingly, that technology is coming. I've read a couple of AI stories where someone sent me an AI version of a story that they want to tell, and I've read it, and within a few pages I can tell that it's AI. There is a I can't remember where the phrase comes from, but there is a phrase that certainly at the moment AI can't mimic childhood trauma. And it's that whole idea that within you is an individual and a person who has got life experience that you can put on a page using certain words in a certain order that gives your voice to that story. And as I say, given time, AI might match that a little bit, but at the moment it can't. By all means, get the AI generator to help write your synopsis or your log line. But in terms of actually writing a formatted script, that's still you at a keyboard.
I guess on a related note, Melanie asks, is there a good app to use for writing a screenplay in the proper format? I know for a while, was everyone using Final Draft? Is that still standard over here as well? Or?
There are. There are sort of two industry standards. One is called Final Draft, and one is called Screenwriter. They're both very good. They are competitors with one another. It used to be that Screenwriter was largely US based and Final Draft was used in the UK, but it's crossed over much more these days. So those are two good ones. They're like any sort of software application. They cost a bit to sort of download for the first time, but actually once you've got it, it will really, really help. There are also, if you search the internet, and I'm trying to think of the name of one, but if you just type into the internet free screenplay formats and just see what comes up, there are one or two that will allow you to sort of format something into a correct screenplay format. So have a hunt around the internet. Final Draft and Screenwriter have loads more bells and whistles that you won't be able to get on the internet, but just for a basic format to be able to write it quite easily, have a hunt around the internet. But yeah, Final Draft and Screenwriter are the sort of professional go-tos.
Kitty asks, how does a writer ensure that the work isn't stolen when they send it out to production companies? This is something that I think a lot of folks ask us when they talk about working with an editor or sending it out to agents.
Yeah.
There's a general fear that once it gets out there, it could get stolen.
I think, there's an element of trust involved. And I would, there's sort of a couple of answers to this. The first one is, this is why it's also very useful to have representation, because if you have an agent or a manager, then they will be part of a team that has access to lawyers. And all industries are pretty litigious, so you need to have that sort of legal backup. But generally, honestly, I would say it's got to be a really dodgy underhand production company that is going to take your idea and pretend it's theirs and not give you any credit or not any payment at all. To be honest, there has to be an element of trust. There has to be an element of faith that the industry will not screw you over. And generally, I would say it really doesn't, because if that production company, if it ever got out that production company genuinely actually took your idea and stole it without crediting you, then the reputation that production company would plummet. And I go back to what I said about you won't be able to sell your screenplay to a production company or a studio on your own. That's why, because they won't read stuff that is from unrepresented writers for exactly that reason, because they have lawyers who will make sure that everything that comes in is registered, the synopsis is taken, it's read by someone who's one of their team. So an unrepresented writer cannot say Warner Brothers stole my idea, because Warner Brothers will go, we don't read unsolicited scripts. It's a shame it's got to that point, but that's it's kind of trying to make the industry safe for you so that you can send your script to an agent or a manager or a production company and trust them. But I would try and get representation first before you send it to a production company.
I had a quick look, and I think the WGA,
Sorry,
if you're in America.
I'm so sorry. One little tiny addendum to that. Email it to yourself. It's a really easy way of just, because it used to be in the olden days that you posted it to yourself and you just didn't open the envelope and it had a postmark on it. Email the script to yourself, CC it to a trusted friend. That email will be dated. And it will say, this is my screenplay and this is when I sent it.
And by the looks of it, you can, if you're in the States, you can register it with the WGA for $20.
Yes.
So.
Yes, you can. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'd forgotten that. Quite right. You can do that as well.
A lot of folks we talk about, do we need to copyright it? Like, copyright is one of these things we talk about a lot as well. Like, if anything you write is already copywritten, you don't actually have to register it in order to benefit from it. I think there are certain things in America where if you are registered copyright, you are entitled to some statutory damages. But I think a lot of the time people, ideas will get stolen. There's like the old story of, I think, someone had pitched something to the Star Trek producers about, a series taking place on a spaceship, and they like passed on that, and then it was like Babylon 5 got created, and then a year or two afterwards, Star Trek came out with Deep Space Nine, which is basically the sort of same thing. But it is like an idea can be stolen, but your work, your talent, your characters, and is what they'll be looking for, as with any form of writing. Jezebel asks, can there be more than one main character? You mentioned before that, with your One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest example, that Randall P. Murphy was your guy there. What if you're dealing with sort of I guess there are exceptions to the rule, more of an ensemble cast?
Yes, you can. I would just have a think about which movies do that. And there are some, Crash is one that immediately springs to mind. I mean, there are several others where there's a group of characters whose stories we are following, but ultimately, even in those stories, you will tend to have one or two that you are rooting for. Again, that's slightly different in TV. In TV, you can follow sort of multiple heroes because, you look at any sort of precinct drama, West Wing immediately springs to mind, which I know isn't an adaptation, but, there were sort of hero characters within that. But actually, all of those sort of 6, 7, 8 lead characters ultimately had their own stories, and they might lead separate different episodes. So yes, you can, but make sure you've got someone who the audience is sort of rooting for, sympathetic with, emotionally understanding of, that sort of thing. But have a look at the movies that have multiple or leads or ensemble casts. You need to be really clear about the story that you're telling for each of those characters. So yes, you can, but it can be trickier.
I've got a question here from a fellow Reedsy editor, Rebecca. They work with lots of screenwriters who are novelizing their books. So my favourite genre of book when I was growing up was novelizations. Are there any bad habits from screenwriting to writing for fiction to avoid?
Yeah, so I would say, I would say this from my own experience. So I'm adapting a screenplay that I wrote a few years ago that I thought would actually make a really good series of novels. And the thing that really hit me when I first started writing was multiple point of view. So in having said you got one lead character or one main hero heroine in a movie, if you've got two characters talking in a scene, in a visual scene, a camera can pull focus to a person who's listening way over in the distance, and you as an audience know that person who's listening is the person that we want to be interested in because they're hearing this conversation that's going on. And it's multiple point of views by simply moving the camera and directing the audience as to what they're looking at and what they're watching. In a book, that's really hard to do. You can't just go from one paragraph to the next paragraph to the next paragraph with a different character, internalize thoughts and what they're thinking. You can do multiple characters. You can move from one to the other. It might be chapter by chapter or section by section. But that's the thing that I found. And I have read a couple of books recently by writers where one of my notes is you've got too many point of views going on within the story. You're sort of internalizing thoughts from too many characters within this chapter. So off the top of my head, that springs to mind. It's something from my own experience and something I've read recently. And also, sorry, past and present tense. I've read it the other way, where people have written a novel, write a screenplay, and it's all in the past. The stage directions are all in the past tense. And it's like, no, it's happening now.
We have a question here from Adrienne. Hi, Richard. Thank you. Do agents or managers ever consider pitches, or do they typically only look at finished screenplays?
They may very well. I mean, basically, what they're looking for is the quality of you as a writer. So they may very well engage in a conversation, an email exchange with you if you pitch yourself and your idea very well. But ultimately, what they're looking for in you is your quality as a writer. So they won't make any final decisions until they've read your work.
Cool. Let's see. We have quite a few still. Oh, Sylvie has a question relating to something you said earlier. Can you please explain more what you mean by if it's not setting up or paying off, cut it? What do you mean by setting up, and what do you mean by paying off?
So trying to think of the easiest, pithiest way of explaining this. When you've only got 22,000 words in a screenplay to tell your story, every word needs to count. And so every line of stage direction should be setting up an image or a character to the person who's reading it so that they can visualize it, because that's ultimately what your screenplay is going to do. It's going to be a visual medium. So you might be setting up the look of the lead character. You might be setting up the tone of the film, either with use of language or use of graphic violence or whatever it might be, but you're setting a tone. Is it a PG? Is it a 12A? Is it an 18? You're setting up location and atmosphere. Is the rain beating against the window? Is it dark? Is it? And the reason you're setting all this up is because ultimately the story is going to pay these things off. If tonally it's a scary movie because it's a scary story, then the audience know there's going to be jump scares. And that's what you're building. That's probably an easy version, actually, of a setup and a payoff. You're setting up characters, tone, atmosphere, language that you're going to pay off later in the story, either by giving a jump scare, paying off a joke. You might put a line of something. So detective stories is another good example. You might set a clue in Act 1 that you're going to pay off in Act 3 or 4. But the reason it's so important in terms of the screenplay as opposed to the book is what I was saying about that internal narrative pace. You have got 2 hours to keep your audience's attention, and they are in a darkened room, possibly with a beer, possibly with air conditioning. They may drop off on a really comfortable seat. You have to keep them engaged. And that happens by creating this cause and effect sequence of setup, payoff, setup, payoff. It doesn't have to be line after line. You might set up something in the first 10 pages that you don't pay off until the very last image of the film. But there should be a sense that you're setting something up or you're paying something off. I hope that helps.
Patches 141 says, do indie published novels have any shot of getting picked up for screenplay adaptation?
Yeah. I mean, you know, intellectual property is and has been for the last 15 years, you know, the hot thing. Essentially because people want to mitigate their loss. You know, people want to take as minimal risk as they possibly can on spending, you know, 10, 20, 100, $200 million on a movie. So if you've got a book that has some built-in audience, then people are going to be interested. The obvious best example of that is probably Andy Weir's The Martian, which started out as a digital published book. You know, it didn't get picked up as a book until it had gone past, I don't know how many sales. And then it got picked up and was published, by which time Scott Free were interested and got the option, and they turned it into the film we all know.
You've got a Silo, the Hugh Howey one. I think that was self-published to start with as well. But I guess you probably need a certain... Yeah, all this is about a certain... They want a certain assurance that it has that built-in audience. It has proven to work in another medium. So that indie published novel has to have some level of success, I guess, rather than just be out there in the ether.
Absolutely.
Let's see. We've got a question here. Oh, David Miller, which is more important, a unique story idea or the quality of writing?
They're both really important. If you think your screenplay or your TV script is going to be used as a calling card to get meetings, to get an agent, to get representation, then the quality of the writing has to be absolutely the best you can possibly make it. So I, for example, got a script optioned last year, which was a contemporary detective story. Now, that is not a unique story. And detective stories and mystery stories are never going to go away. So, you know, a unique story idea might really get people listening. And it's easy to do what they call an elevator pitch, which is trying to sell your story in 30 seconds if it's a unique story idea, because you can do it in one line. And I'd recommend you try and do that with your story anyway. But ultimately, what an agent is looking for and what production companies are looking for is the quality of writing. How well do you write dialogue? How well can you put a character on a page that feels alive and visual when you read it? That's what they're looking at. How unique is your voice in terms of your writing? How well can you portray that story visually? Better to have a unique story. If it's been done lots before, then it's unlikely to get picked up. But the quality of writing will probably be the first thing that gets noticed. Martin, I've lost your.
Oh, sorry. I'm muting myself
There you
because
go.
I was just snuffling non-stop. But sorry, Rebecca mentioned that. I put that up there largely for me to remember because I'm always looking for people who have sort of worked with Reedsy professionals and gone on to success. So, Snowdonia. I'll brain that one. I could do a couple more, I reckon, before we wrap things up. Um, let's see. Keith Bernhard said, "How about using a treatment of a piece of IP instead of a full-blown screenplay?" Could you sort of explain to us what a treatment is?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, there's various phrases for what is essentially a summary document of a previous existing IP. So it might be a treatment, it might be a pitch document, it might be a pitch deck, which includes pictures. There are various synopsis. There are various different phrases for this. But once you've done your beat sheet and you've kind of put it into beginning, middle, end, and this is what happens. This is the chronology of the story. But here is the theme. This is what it's about. This is its deeper meaning. This is how it will emotionally resonate with an audience. That can work if you say, I have a finished manuscript, and here's my sort of couple of pages outlining what the book, what the story is, and why it will resonate with an audience. You could try and sort of at least engage an agent or representation with that. I guess the problem is that the screenplay is something that people can read that is a definite point along the production process. A sort of summary document like a treatment it's useful, but it's just summarizing the story. It might be quite a good step to get to a screenplay, but yeah, it might be a way of focusing down the story. Actually, it might be a different version of doing a beat sheet in some ways. So.
Cool. All right. I think we'll call it a day there. Richard, I want to thank you so much for this. Before we sign off, I just remind everyone that Richard is available as an editor on Reedsy. If you've got a screenplay that you would like help with, just find his details in the video description. Richard, are you sort of open to working on any other types of project at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you see from the TV shows that I've made, I've still got a real sort of crime and thriller background in terms of stories, and have a passion for sci-fi. So things that fall into those categories, whether manuscripts or screenplays or plays, very happy to have a look.
Cool. Amazing. Everyone, we've got 1 week off, and then we're back the week after with, I think, one on writing scenes with Oksana Marafiotti, who's one of our returning visitors. So please sign up for that over at blog.reedsy.com/live. And of course, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We've got lots of great content there, including a few things on structure, which I think applies quite well to film. I would like to thank you for tuning in. I'd like to thank Richard for presenting today. And yeah, see you all soon. Bye.